We're in Daniel 10, if you'd like to turn there. We've been looking at the prophecies. Actually, we've been looking at the whole book. For those of you who are visiting with this, the whole book of Daniel. At the end of the book of Daniel, after pretty much it tells Daniel's story, are a series of visions that were given to Daniel about things that are to come. And Daniel 10 is interesting because it gives a little insight into the why behind that, which I thought was great. And so, what let's do, let me turn this off so I don't disconnect anything. Let's have a prayer before we dive in. Our Father, thank you so much that you created this amazing existence for us to live in. Just look around us and we see your love. We also see a world that tries us. We know that we don't get any better, we don't progress in our lives unless we have hard times. And we know, as we see from your word here, as we're going to look at your servant Daniel's letter, your accounts, we thank you so much that through these accounts you show us who you are and how you want us to be like you, and you want us to focus on what's beyond this life, what's spiritual instead of just physical. Help us, help our minds and our hearts as we're looking at your word here this morning to be open to that. Strengthen us, Father, in this. We pray this through your Son, our Savior, Jesus, the Christ, the Anointed One. Amen. So, take it. Yeah, it wasn't on. It's on now. I just turned it on. Yeah, it looks like somebody's in there, so hopefully she just got in. Yeah, Yvonne's the main one that we try to take care of her. The last chapter that we looked at, chapter 9, was in the first year of Darius, and now we're looking at chapter 10. And all of a sudden, we're in King Cyrus. I don't know how many years they are apart, but it's several years have passed. I tried to look it up, but the accounts really differ wildly, because you look at Wikipedia, not the best, right? But still, there's some information, because they argue back and forth behind the scenes. I don't know if you all looked at that, but they're saying that Darius's reign ended at like 486, which is Cyrus was in power whenever the Israelites went back to Jerusalem, which is in like 515 or something like that. So it doesn't jive. So do we really need to know? No. All we need to know is what's here. And because history is imperfect, and history a lot of times is written by the victors, and that colors things. So there's only a limited amount that we could get from that. So we're just going to look at the Bible. Chapter 9 was all about the coming of Jesus and the destruction of Jerusalem, and the Jews not being able to sacrifice anymore, not to have their temple worship, and that was going to be all done away with. And That was hard for Daniel. Now Daniel, a few years later, now we're in another, I don't know if you would call it dynasty, but now you've got Cyrus, who is the emperor of the Persian Empire. And in the third year of his reign, and Daniel's still around. He was high up in both Darius's and Nebuchadnezzar's empire. And we were not given here in this chapter, at least, where he's at, but he's still around. It's got to be getting on in years. And in verse 1, it says, in the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a word was received, or can't read, a word was revealed to Daniel. So what I'd like to do is, now just to kind of give you a little bit of structure of what's going to go on here. We're going to look at chapter 10, and there's a vision that he's going to talk about in chapter 10. But there's kind of a vision, but there's not any prophecy. There's not really any words until chapter 11. It spends 20 verses and of all of chapter 10 talking about what happened before the vision actually took place. Any words took place about what was going to happen. So I think it's worthwhile to take a look at chapter 10 and see what we can get. Because we've been going through this, and one of the main questions we've been asking as we've been going through Daniel is, what do these verses say about Daniel's character? So we can see and learn from this man of God what a person that God, I hesitate, I'm kind of looking for a word, God approves of or God likes. He's a man, he sinned, but God thought a lot of Daniel, as he's said before, and we're going to see again in this chapter. So if there's somebody that's like that, it's worthwhile paying close attention to and see if we could learn something from him so that we can make ourselves more like him as he's being more like God, kind of like with Paul, right? So let's look at the first I think I'd like to look at the first 4 verses and then that give us a little bit of foundation what's going on here. So verses 1 through 4. In the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a message was revealed to Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar. The message was true, but the appointed time was long, and he understood the message and had understanding of the vision. And in those days, I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks. I ate no pleasant food, no meat or wine came into my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all, till 3 whole weeks were fulfilled. Now, on the 24th day of the first month, I was by the side of the great river that is in Tigris, and then the vision happens. So we'll get into that in a minute. Let's start at some of the background. When you look at these 4 verses, thoughts, and what can we see from what was happening with Daniel, where Daniel was at in his life? And think of this in context of a Jew who's in captivity away from his land, and to think of time frames. What might be going on with Daniel in this? Any thoughts, just even beyond that, what you saw when you looked at those first 4 verses?
I guess the question is, what is the thing that was revealed?
Yeah. Well, we're going to see part of the thing in the next, in verse 5. but then the rest of it's going to be a chapter. There's a lot. So, oh, thank you, Richard. Okay, yeah, that's a great question, and that's what we need to be thinking about, right? As we're looking through this. Other thoughts on these first 4 verses?
It must have been bad because he was in mourning.
He was in mourning. Well, that's a great question. Why did Daniel get in mourning at this time? Richard, you have a thought?
Well, he's been given all these visions, and if you think about the Jews and their practice up until that time, is talking about that coming to an end, and there's still a lot that's going to befall his people. And I think it's just a lot coming to take him.
So you think he might have been mourning for that? And given the time frame, what might have been a specific thing that he was mourning about? Michelle?
Well, I was also thinking this is also part of the time when some of the Jewish people have already gone back to Jerusalem.
That's a great question. I didn't look as close to that as I should have.
Thinking about how they were already going back.
So this is, so yeah, how, I'd have to go back and look. I kind of assumed, I apologize. So had that return of Nehemiah happened yet by this time? Okay, that's something to further look at. Now, but there's something else I find significant about this time frame and what we're given the time frame of the first month. Now, would that be the first month in Persian time or the first month in the Jewish calendar? I submit it's the first month in the Jewish calendar. If that's the case, what might he have been mourning for? Passover. That's what happened in the first month. So you have, the Passover. That's what, and he was doing this for 3 weeks, and it's the 24th of the month, and the Passover started on when? 14th. The 14th day. And did they do preparation before that? I think, and it was a 7-day process, and it ended up being the 14th. And I'm not sure exactly how that ties in with. It was, what is it? On the 24th day of the first month, this is when the vision actually started. But he's mourning because they can't do the Passover as they should have been able to do. They can't do their Passover feast. So that we kind of talked about it in general. This is in specific. This is one of their main events. But think about that. What was the Passover about? What was the Passover in remembrance of? When did it start?
When they left Egypt.
When they were in bondage in Egypt when it started. And now where are they? Back in bondage again. This time is because of their sin. Because for hundreds of years they ignored God and followed after idols, especially their leaders. So that's something that I thought was worthwhile considering whenever you look at where Daniel's mind was at when this vision hit him, and he's out away from the city or wherever he was at, because he's at on the banks of the river of Tigris, I think is what it said. And so Ezekiel was on a different river, though, right, Bob? He was on the Kibar or something? Yeah, he was on the river Kibar.
The Grand Canal.
So the Grand Canal, okay. And so that's in the beginning of the book of Ezekiel, we find that out. But so he's kind of doing something similar, but he's out away from and he's mourning. And you kind of think that Daniel is not a happy guy at this point, because we keep, each vision, it hits him hard. But these are years apart. They're years and years apart. So each time, God's, he's giving him time. in between the visions. So I'm sure, but still, I'm sure, the whole time that in his mind, he's thinking of how they're exiled. And they don't have the temple. They don't have the temple worship. The temple was where they went before God, right? But it didn't stop him, because we know from earlier chapters that he went, and morning, noon, and night, he went before God and prayed to him. And that's significant, as we're going to see. Anything else in that? Jumping ahead, verse 7, notice that there's other people with him, that there's other men with him. Possibly Jewish men, we don't know, but if he's mourning for the Passover, and most likely it's other people from his country. Now, what I'd like to do is, one other quick thing. Let's jump back up to verse 1 about what it says about the message. Now, Jim, could you read your version in verse 1 and see what it says?
Verse 1?
Yeah, verse 1.
In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a thing was revealed unto Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar. And the thing was true, but the time appointed was long. And he understood the thing, and had understanding of the vision.
Interesting. Yeah, my version says the message. So whatever version you have the message, you have the thing. But what is it? We're given a little bit of insight on what's to come. What are the 3 things that it says about the thing, or the message in that verse?
And it is true.
It's true. Number 1, it's true. So it's to be relied on. And the second thing is it says the appointed time was long. So what could that mean? Maybe it's in the future, a long time. This is going to be a while before this happens. That's what I think whenever I see that. And then that he was going to be able to understand it. Of course, he was blessed with each vision that he was involved with, whether it was for somebody else or for him. So, Bob.
So New American Standard has a slightly different. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a message was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belteshazzar. And the message was true and of great conflict.
Oh.
But he understood the message and had an understanding of the vision. So it's going to be a time of great conflict.
Yeah. So we're going to see that, and that's going to be borne out, and what we're going to. So now, given that all this background information, let's jump in and read the rest of the chapter, and then I'd like to break each of the sections down. Starting in verse 5, this is what Daniel saw. I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose waist was girded with gold of Uphaz. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like torches of fire, his arms and feet like burnished bronze in color, and the sound of his words like the voice of a multitude. And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men that were with me did not see the vision, but a great terror fell on them, so that they fled to hide themselves. Therefore I was left alone when I saw this great vision, and no strength remained in me. For my vigor was turned into frailty in me, and I retained no strength. Yet I heard the sound of his words, and while I heard the sound of his words, I was in a deep sleep on my face, with my face to the ground, and suddenly a hand touched me, which made me tremble on my knees and on the palms of my hands. And he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly beloved, understand the words that I speak to you, and stand upright. For I have now been sent to you. And while he was speaking this word to me, I stood trembling. Then he said to me, do not fear, Daniel. For from the first day you have set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before your God. And your words were heard, and I have come because of your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, and behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. For I had been left alone there with the kings of Persia. Now I have come to you to make you understand what will happen to your people in the latter days. For the vision refers to many days yet to come. When he had spoken such words to me, I turned my face toward the ground and became speechless. And suddenly one having the likeness of the sons of man touched my lips. Then I opened my mouth and spoke, saying to him who stood before me, my Lord, because of the vision, my sorrows have overwhelmed me, and I have retained no strength. For how can this servant of my Lord talk with you, my Lord? As for me, no strength remains in me now, nor is any breath left in me. Then again, the one having the likeness of a man touched me and strengthened me. And he said, O man, greatly beloved, fear not. Peace be to you. Be strong. Yes, be strong. So when he spoke to me, I was strengthened, and he said, let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. Then he said, do you know why I have come to you? And now I must return to fight with the prince of Persia. And when I have gone forth, indeed the prince of Greece will come. But I would tell you what is noted in the scripture of truth. No one upholds me against these except Michael, your prince. And then that's where chapter 11 starts, and the message, the real message starts. But there's a lot that we could get out of the rest of this chapter here. I'd like to look at just verses 5 through 6 real quick, in the description of this messenger. Look at some of can you imagine if you saw somebody like this? You have this, is clothed in linen with this gold belt, and his body was like beryl. So, does anybody know what beryl looks like?
Yellow serpentine.
So it's a yellow, okay, and it's interesting that you say that, because then I looked at another thing of beryl, and it came up green. And then I looked, and then I found that beryl is like this whole family of gemstones. It's got aquamarine in it, and it's got all these different ones, that are well known. I can't remember what they all are now, but it's a bunch of different ones. But I don't know to them what it would have been.
So if it's pure, it's clear and prismatic. If it's impure, then it has various colors, blue, green, aquamarine, the yellow that was mentioned.
Depending on the purity, probably. Yeah.
Depending on the impurity.
Okay, good. So it's Bob was saying that in the pure form, beryl is clear, and it depends on the impurity in it that gives it the different color. Which isn't it interesting how God made things, that something that gets the words are escaping me, gets colored by something. It gives it a different color. It's impure by some kind of outside influence as it's created. Just kind of off the beaten path a little bit. Isn't it interesting how God made all these gemstones just for us to go find? How many what's sitting out there in the earth right now that God made for us to discover? I don't know if you ever looked at any videos of them discovering some of these different gemstones. It's absolutely fascinating. It's all just out there buried. That's the kind of God that we serve, that created a world like that, that has just these wonders everywhere. Okay, so anyhow, so his torso is beryl, and not barrel, but beryl, so it's like a jewel tone, and his face is like lightning, and his eyes are like fiery torches, and his arms and feet are like burnished bronze, and his voice are like the sound of all these different voices together. So this is what is appearing to Daniel. So kind of makes sense that his reactions would be, what they are. So looking at Daniel's reaction to them, he ends up with his nose strengthened and he's face down on the ground. And then this hand touches him and strengthens him. And what does that tell you about Daniel? I don't know if it doesn't tell me as much as what comes after, because I think most of us being in that situation would probably be a very similar situation, or very similar reaction. Isaiah was
have one song.
or with Paul.
The men with him didn't see the vision, but they were frightened and saw a great light. That's all they saw.
Yeah.
And they fell down. So it's exactly like Paul.
So exactly like the road to Damascus. Cindy, I thought of that too. But very, very similar. The men around didn't see it, but only him.
This reminds me also of what's mentioned in Revelation 1, that because he talks about the image is pretty much the same, and that in verse 17 he says, "Then I saw him and fell at his feet, was dead, and he laid his right hand on his saying to me, do not be afraid, I am the first and the last."
The Apostle John. The Apostle John saw something very similar in Revelation 1, and his reaction was, again, the same. That in his case, he saw Jesus. And we know this isn't Jesus because of what, let's go down. Let's go down and talk about what this man tells him. Actually, let's look at 11 through 14. And about what this man says to Daniel. What does what this man says to Daniel tell us about Daniel's character? This is where, because this isn't Daniel speaking. This is God's viewpoint of Daniel. This is what God thinks of Daniel. Wow.
I'm not sure if this is what you're talking, where you're going, but what does the angel of the Lord tell Joshua? Be strong and of good courage. He keeps repeating it. So it's essentially here, yes, you're beloved of God. Take courage. Take courage. Be strengthened.
Be strengthened. Because he was going through a tough time. And then, he's in mourning, and then this vision comes, and it's to strengthen him. Now look at some of the phrases that you see in there. He says, like you mentioned, Bob, is, "Oh man, greatly beloved." Can you imagine hearing that from God? Directly, "Oh man, greatly beloved." But that's not what gets me about this. It's verse 12. When you look at verse 12, he says, "And he said to me, do not fear, Daniel, for from the day that you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before God, your words were heard. And I've come for your words." That says so much about what God thinks about Daniel. So God thinks that, or he knows that. So when did that happen? From the first day that you set your heart to understand. We don't know the date, but when did that probably happen? Thoughts, Richard?
When he chose not to eat the choice foods.
Yeah, the first record that we have, yeah. And that's when that he's, he's starting on his road, at least there, because and why is he doing that? Because he's got this, Daniel has this mindset. And now we know some more of what's behind it, because he had set his mind, and I don't know what some of the other versions said, that you set his heart to understand. He wants to understand. And he's also set his heart to humble himself before God. So can we get any personal applications out of that?
So I agree with what Richard said, but think about before he was taken captive, he had begun to set his heart toward the things of God. Think of Joshua, who was prepared for 40 years to have his heart and mind set toward God. We need to start setting our heart and mind toward God as soon as possible, and treating our children and grandchildren to do the very same thing. It doesn't just happen. It's a process. And God will bring us along as we exercise our faith.
And look how God responds to that. That if we set our mind as early as possible, if you have it today, that's a great day to start. Bruce.
Yeah, I don't think it's so much about Daniel. It says a lot about his character for sure, but these last few chapters are really detailing God's prophetic plan for Israel.
Yeah.
And I think
I agree.
we don't want to get lost from that message, I don't think.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And I thought it was good though, because there wasn't enough time to cover this chapter and then get into the vision. So I was going to save the vision for next week, but I agree with that. The vision, what he's saying is what we should be focused on. Absolutely.
I do think this is Jesus, just because every time there's a shift in power, he's always there. He's the rock that hits the statue and everything shatters. So every time there's a change in power, he's there. And this look of him is always his depiction outside of his earthly form. And he always talks to people in vision. Whenever you look at Paul, whenever he's on the road, he says, "Why are you persecuting me?" And that's Jesus.
Yeah.
So I think every time there's a major shift in power, Jesus is there.
So every time there's a shift in power, and we definitely see that with Daniel, right? Because whenever Belteshazzar took over for Nebuchadnezzar, there might have been another emperor in there, but whenever he took over, Mark's got his hand up.
That was a question that I had.
Oh, okay.
Because
There's
that was a big question that I had about whether you said that this probably isn't Jesus, and I always thought it was, because it's different to the incarnation we see in Revelation or Ezekiel, of like when an angel comes down and you see it. It's very, very like depicted and specific. This is very similar to the Revelation version, where it's human, like, and I always thought that this was Jesus.
So since he's and the likeness of a man, and the description is very similar to Revelation 1, and I see that too, but then I go to and we haven't got to this thing about the Prince of Persia, and that and that's what throws me off from this being about this being Jesus. So that's my struggle with that, and right now I'm kind of on the side of it not being Jesus, but am I perfect? Do I know this perfect? Yeah, go ahead, and then Bob.
I thought it was Jesus also, but I have a comment. It says, the angel in the form of a man clothed in linen could not be the pre-incarnate Messiah, because Christ would not need help from the angel Michael.
Okay, so Christ wouldn't need help from the angel Michael. That's an interesting point. That's kind of along, where I was going. And why would he even need to fight with the Prince of Persia? Although Revelation does talk about Jesus fighting, doesn't it? It does.
But if you look at the other incarnations, if you will, go back to Joshua, where he says, I have come. And when you see the incarnations or the theophanies, it's I have come, not I have been sent. Here he has been sent as a messenger, just like Gabriel. So in this case, he has been sent to give a message to Daniel, because the prayers have been heard. I'm not going to. I'm going to stay off this fence. Whether this is Jesus or not, but the wording is different, and the messaging is different. Even though there's a strengthening, there's a difference in message and appearance than there has been in the past when it's been in theophany.
Okay, so there's there's a difference in the way this message, and it's like the context is more of a messenger, that one that is sent and that's the angels we know are God's messengers. Now let me see if I can benefit from you all's information, because into verse 12 he says, I have come because of your words. God's answering Daniel's prayers, right? So now he says, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. Behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left alone with the kings of Persia. Now, any insight on what that could be talking about? Any brave soul went to? Richard?
I was reading one, and it was interesting. Again, I don't know if it's accurate or not, but it wasn't so much when we look at the word fighting, but it was the word contending. In a sense, we know that God's plan was for Cyrus to let the people, Jewish people, go back, that they were there contending with Cyrus and in trying to put God's plan into place. So that angel that was left to contend with the king of Persia then was by himself, and he needed Michael to come in to finish God's plan with the king of Persia so they could free Gabriel to then go.
So, yeah, so isn't, now throw into that mix, go down to verse 20, and it says, now, do you know why I have come to you, this man? And now I must return to fight with the prince of Persia, and when I have gone forth, indeed, the prince of Greece will come. So what's the next kingdom? Is the kingdom of Greece. And then Alexander the Great is going to come in and take over Persia. So, is that talking about just the different kingdoms? And what goes on behind the scenes? We don't know, and how that works. But there's God is working behind the scenes here in some way. And we just don't have enough information to know. But Bob, thoughts?
So the question that I have in reading this, and I didn't look for other sources, but who has always contended with God's plan for his people? and it's the prince of darkness. We could call him the prince of Persia, we call him the prince of Greece, and who has always contended with God's servants and God's plans, but the prince of darkness.
Who has always contended with God, the prince of darkness. Now, if you would, let's look at Ephesians 6. And I don't know if, how well this fits with this, but it might give us just a little bit more information tying these two together. Ephesians 6, and starting in verse 10, where this is what God tells them, tells the apostle, through the apostle Paul to the Ephesian brotherhood. Be strong, finally be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God. And why? Why is he having to put on the whole armor of God? Why do we have to put on the whole armor of God? That's so that we may stand against the schemes of the devil, the prince of darkness. I don't know if that's a biblical term. But it's the devil, right? For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. So again, this is one of the verses where the curtain, behind the scenes curtain, has opened up a little bit. And we see that there's something going on. Cindy's got her hand up. So there's something going on behind the scenes that we really don't see much. We just see here and there. And in Daniel 10, we're given a little bit of information about the prince of Persia and the prince of Greece, and that there's a messenger from God that's going to struggle against these princes, and that it's not just something that just happens, but God's actively working behind the scenes with all of this. Cindy.
Yeah, going along with that, I do see a similarity between this example and Revelation. That John was in distress. Obviously he's going through a lot. But God allows him to see what's happening in the heavenly places. Where sometimes you feel like God isn't working, he got a glimpse of what's going on in heaven. And that God is active and he's working and he's doing stuff. And he's making this happen, and this happen, and this happen. And here you have Daniel in distress. And he's given the opportunity to see that God isn't slack. He's working things, he's doing stuff. And even though you don't see it, here's your peace, because God is working. And he is doing stuff. And he's going to have the whole plan come about. Here you have the Persians, you have Nebuchadnezzar, and now you're going to have Greece. He's making these things happen. Even if you don't think they're going to happen, God is making things happen.
So we're out of time, but before we go, so what do we get out of that? Personally, how does that change us? How does that help us tomorrow and in this week to come? Thoughts? How does that help us, knowing what all of this that we just looked at? You guys can say it. Helen.
That was kind of what we've been talking about in the last 2 weeks. God's in charge, don't worry.
God's in charge. Simply stated, God's in charge, don't worry. Yeah, excellent. And so, because it's hard. It's hard going through this to see the world in such turmoil, and because we have so much information, we see so much turmoil. And this just helps us trust him and get through and have some peace, in this life. God's got this. So we will start on chapter 11 next week on the actual vision. Thank you so much.
There's no actual word.
What's that?
I said, no problem.
Okay.
Morning, gentlemen.
What's going on?
How are you?
Good, man.
Morning.